Brandon Vogel from Hale Varsity here. We were talking about kickers because we had a question. When was the last time Nebraska had a kicker that was money from 40 to 45?
Alex Henry.
That's what the first thing. Yeah. He's the all-time leading, I guess, right? Isn't he the leading percentage-wise?
I think he is, and if he's not, he's definitely up there. I mean, I just think back to that Colorado game, where Sue ended up returning the interception. But before that kick, well, that was Maher. Sorry, I'm going back too far. So, yeah.
Well, so Maher's been the last one, right? Like the last one where you could be like, Henry.
Well, I mean, I think that was a 53-yard kick against Colorado, and it was just kind of like, sure, take a shot. Like I remember feeling confident at that moment of like, all right, this has a decent shot of going in, even if it seemed crazy at the time.
So you may not have numbers on this, but I guess my perception is how many kickers in general, like, is this a specific to Nebraska problem? Because it seems like college kickers in general, once you get over 40, it's kind of a crapshoot.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know the breakdown off the top of my head of like 40 plus. But every year on field goals in college football, like the national average, so all of them, 50-yard attempts, 15 or 17-yard attempts, whatever. It's about 75%. So like if you're hitting 75% overall, you're about average. During the Maher Henry years, Nebraska was much better than that. In fact, for a while, I think it was much better than that. Of late, you've had some ups and downs. I think they were at 50% twice under Scott Frost. And some of that was due to injuries. Some of that was due to, kind of a bizarre regression to the mean last year. So it's been way more of an adventure than you want if you're trying to get a program back on track. That probably goes without saying.
Brandon, wanted to talk to you about the Big Ten preseason media poll that came out just recently. Nebraska slated at 5th, basically the lowest you can get in the West before you get into Purdue Northwestern of the world.
Does Northwestern count this year? Let's start there. Like, are they going to be able to finish the season?
It's gonna be a rough one for the Wildcats, and obviously, like, even if none of what has happened in the past month had happened to Northwestern, this is where they would be in that.
Right? They were going to be bad anyway, right?
Mm.
Like, it almost becomes like a long shot play if there were a book out there saying which team won't finish last. Like, I'd probably take Northwestern because it would seem like an overlay. Like, the Big Ten West is so jumbled enough that it gets weird. And what jumped out to me from the Cleveland.com poll was it kind of goes basically in order of most of the big power rankings that are out there. I think it's almost exactly in order of SP Plus, which views Purdue and Nebraska as kind of interchangeable going into the year in terms of their rating. But, there's I don't know how clear the difference is between Michigan and Ohio State. Michigan brings back more. I think on paper they're better suited to be the slight favorite, but boy, if you put Ohio State at number 2 and give me slightly better odds on the Buckeyes, that's something I'd probably take a long look at as well.
Yeah, Nebraska at 5? I mean, okay, I was gonna make a joke about the Northwestern thing, and their last win and all that stuff, but I think that's been overplayed for a while now since Ireland. But Nebraska being at 5, I mean, is there a scenario where they finish 2 probably outside of Wisconsin in the West?
Well, I think so. I mean, really,
the West is just, I'll say, frankly, the West is just bad.
How big is the gap between 1 and 5, basically,
in the
your
West?
Mind?
Not very big at all, in my opinion. And like, I get why Wisconsin's there. They obviously struggled enough by their current standard that they ended up firing, Paul Christ. So But you look back at those seasons, like one of them was 2020, which at this point, when I look back at that year, good or bad, I'm almost throwing it out.
Yeah,
you know, you look at some of the conference, like even championship game or participants in that, they may not have won it, but you know, yeah, Northwestern was there. San Jose State won the Mountain West, which was cool, but now you're kind of like, it just seemed like a weird anomaly. So I get why Wisconsin's the favorite. Luke Fickell's earned the benefit of the doubt, but I think like maybe outside of Northwestern, like it wouldn't shock me if any of the other 6 teams won the league. And, you know, Purdue was a team I kind of came in like a little bit like, they've got kind of a tough hill here just in terms of all the change, but they can play defense well. And Hudson Card, you know, plays, I think, close to his ceiling. That becomes a dangerous team too. So the difference between those top 5 and maybe even 6, if you want to include Purdue, is those are probably less than a touchdown spreads in almost any of those games right now. We'll see once they start actually playing them. And you get into that territory and it's like, you know, 55%, 45% win expectancy. So they're not quite coin flips, but they're pretty close.
Brandon, are we underestimating the amount of change that Wisconsin's gone through? Because we look at like Purdue,
Mordecai, the quarterbacks.
We got new quarterback, new head coach, new coordinators,
different,
a dramatically different offense. I mean, they've gone through as much change as Purdue, and I think the talent level is probably better at Wisconsin still. But we look at Purdue and assume they're going to be bad, even though they were about very similar records between Purdue and Wisconsin last year. And we look at Wisconsin and assume they're going to win the division. Like it seems like, and I like Wisconsin this year. It just seems like maybe we're underestimating how much has changed up there.
Yeah, I think so. Like in the Longo piece of it, offensive coordinator Phil Longo, plus Mordecai commands so much attention. But Longo, you know, I think he has described himself in the past as an air raid guy. I'd be interested if he still describes himself that way. But he had some North Carolina teams that were, you know, that ran the ball more than they threw it. And it had some pretty good running games. So, you know, if Wisconsin comes to a point where like all of the offseason chatter about like what a departure, which I think is real, I think it's a bigger topic that probably spans even just this first season, but they might be set up pretty well to win right away because, well, they've got one of the best running backs in the Big Ten, maybe the country. And if Tanner Mordecai kind of can use that and know like, hey, my job is not to basically be how my team either wins or loses on offense. Like you're not going to throw it 45 times, but if you enjoy what a big time running back can make, how it can make your job easier. Like, you know, Wisconsin's, I think, in a pretty good spot. So a deserving favorite in some ways, like, you know, maybe the safest thing given the amount of change at Wisconsin, at Purdue, at Nebraska would be Iowa as a favorite. And I think they were only, you know, four first place votes back in that. In that initial poll. But they have to replace a lot on defense. But when has defense been a problem for Iowa?
Yeah, Iowa just needs to score about 17 a game and be all right. Or they should. Is that the number? What's the number?
I think is it 25? I thought it was 25.
25, I think.
25. Yeah. Wow.
I would say they might be all right.
If they get 20, if they can get 4 touchdowns, they're going undefeated. They're going to win 10 games. Sorry, I just. By the way, one of those running backs, North Carolina was Michael Carter, current New York Jet. If people didn't know, we talked about this maybe yesterday. Did we talk about this yesterday? Minnesota has, first of all, they have a 7th-year player that they're bringing to Big Ten Media Days, which, like, is he married with kids? Or
he's got a mortgage for sure.
Like, yeah. Like, how does that happen? Gosh, I thought it was only 6 year with the COVID year. How many COVID years can you get, Brandon? Is it just one?
I think just one. Is it Ottman Bell? Is that who it is?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, so every year in the yearbook, we kind of try to boil down 3 key players on each team. And I think I've included Ottman Bell like 4 times, or at least 3. So, you know, in 2019, they had those 2 big time receivers, and Ottman Bell was kind of like, oh, man. This guy was kind of quietly pretty good. I think he had 500 some yards. So really been writing about him since then. I think he's missed 2 seasons or almost 2 full seasons due to injury. So it's crazy, but that sort of thing I think is going to become a little bit more common. Well, it won't, because you'll lose the code, well, eventually we'll phase out of the special COVID consideration, but just with transfers and, how willing the NCAA ends up being on waivers. You just got some guys that have been around a long, long time.
I feel like they haven't denied a waiver in a very long time, like at all. My Minnesota question was, can they sneak in there? Are they the one that's like kind of, I don't know. I feel like they're not talked about enough right now.
I would generally agree. Like when I'm feeling more adventurous, and if somebody asked me to, slot the Big Ten West, I'd probably still have Wisconsin #1, but I could move Minnesota to #2 over Iowa. They have some key pieces to replace. They've got sort of a change, like 2/3 of a change at quarterback.
Yeah.
But they're at least familiar with where they're going there, and had to change an offensive coordinator. So there's some pieces there, but in terms of like returning production in context nationally, they're kind of like middle of the pack, and they're really defined in terms of their identity, which is the question with Wisconsin, kind of the division favorite. Iowa has that advantage. After that, Purdue's going through change, Nebraska, Northwestern, and then Illinois, has to replace the defensive coordinator and 3 NFL defensive backs. So they know what they want to be, but they're going to have some new faces.
How important is that game for Nebraska on the 31st? If they can win that game, would that springboard them into a much better season than what maybe people think?
I think so. Nebraska, I think on the early lines is about a touchdown, maybe a little bit more underdog in that game, which seems pretty fair. Just given the newness. And, we saw this a couple of years ago with Nebraska against Illinois. I tend to try to downplay these things, but Nebraska came out and said it was really thrown for a loop by not having film on what that new Illinois staff was at that point. That's something the Huskers have in this game. Week ones can always get, pretty squirrely pretty quickly. You don't really know what you have at that point. So I think they've got a good chance to go up there and just play pretty free. Getting a win, I think just starting 1-0 in Big Ten play changes how you look at the division and what it could be. But I think even if they just go up there and play well, then you can go into Colorado with a little bit of like, hey, there's something to build on. We lost a division game against a team that should be further ahead than us right now.
Brandon, I am curious as we kind of get into, by the, this time next week, we'll have had a practice officially under our belts for Nebraska. Is there something right now that you look at for this team and feel like you know to a fairly certain degree about this football team? Anything at all? Or is it all kind of just wait and see for you at this point?
It's mostly wait and see. That's probably the smart way to go into almost any fall camp.
Sure.
I feel like they've got the running backs they need to do what they want, assuming you deal with reasonable or average health there. Don't lose anybody for a season. I feel like they're pretty well suited there. Secondary, obviously you have the returning experience there in terms of starters coming back, but I think that's going to be a place that shifts a little bit. So we'll see how they deploy that, but you've at least got that experience there. I think those are the two that come to mind. It's clear, I think, with what's happened at quarterback that the staff really believes in kind of Jeff Sims' ceiling, but for all of us who just kind of know of him from Georgia Tech, that remains a mystery. And really most of the other positions have some stuff to sort out here through fall camp.
Satterfield said he could play linebacker, so that helps.
It definitely helps in the Big Ten.
He said that last night. But they truly they picked Jeff Sims to come in and be the quarterback.
Yeah,
right?
they handpicked him.
They basically told Casey Thompson to go find somewhere else without telling him that, right? And I guess Jeff Sims has really high-level arm talent. We'll see.
It's been interesting on that front to me, at least, to hear these people talk about him as basically a pro prospect, which,
right.
He probably was coming out of high school. Like you're rated that highly. That's kind of what those ratings are trying to say. And then you go to Georgia Tech and, it was just, you saw the promise, but it was pretty up and down, as was Georgia Tech.
Brandon, I've been thinking a lot about this, this defense and, I mean, the offense, I guess, to a certain extent, regarding their turnover margin. And that's something Nebraska's really struggled with for a long time, not just under Scott Frost. It's been a constant issue for Nebraska under multiple head coaches. If I were to tell you that Nebraska ends up with a positive turnover margin on the season, you would tell me they have won how many games?
7. If it allowing for the instance where it's like +2, or something like that. Yeah. You get to +5 or 6 or higher, you're probably looking at more wins than that. It's
breaking even. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, that's only happened, I think, like 2, maybe 3 times since that Bo Pelini coordinator year in 2003, where they just went nuts.
Crazy.
Yep.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, so it's been a very long year by year kind of regression to the mean on that front. They were so positive there, but that was a big part of that 2019 Baylor season. And the thing that is always tricky for me with turnovers, like every coach is out there emphasizing, we need to avoid them, we need to force them, depending on which side of the ball we're on. And good luck if a team like Iowa kind of makes you wonder a little bit, like, oh, can you actually coach this stuff? Or is it just mostly random? But for Nebraska, they've been on the wrong. If it is random, they've lost a lot of coin flips in a row.
Due.
So at one of these seasons, it's really going to flip, and it's probably going to result in what, in the current context, would be a pretty special season for Husker fans.
What's the biggest priority? Offense getting ramped up, position group getting ramped up the quickest? Is it tight end or wide receiver, or probably a little bit of both?
Yeah. I think when I look at tight end, even without knowing the status of Gilbert at this point, like I can feel pretty good about it, assuming, Thomas Fedoti stays healthy and, looks like the player we all know he can be. But when I look at wide receiver, there's options there. I think Nebraska's okay in terms of depth, but there's not a lot of certainty. And when you bring in a new quarterback, like year to year, just that continuity between passer and pass catcher becomes really, really big. And it's why it's valuable to have a returning quarterback. So Nebraska's not going to have that. It's in a lot of college football now, given the movement of quarterbacks, a lot of teams aren't. So that'll be interesting, kind of big picture going forward. But when I look at it, I would say receiver out of those two groups, and just working with a new quarterback in a new offense.
So a little bit of lack of experience there, I guess. Gosh, it's hard to say that because they're a little older, but they haven't played a lot.
Not a ton of production coming back, though.
Yeah.
That's Brandon Vogel from Hale Varsity. Brandon, we appreciate your time and insight as always, and hope you have a good rest of your week.